Welcome, curious souls. To Grey Vale echoes your portal to the world's most chilling mysteries and untold stories. Join us as we uncover the strange, the supernatural, and the truly unexplained. A lone island off North Carolina holds a chilling secret. In 1590, an entire English settlement vanished, leaving behind only one enigmatic word carved into a post. This is the story of Roanoke, America's first and most haunting mystery. The whispers of the sea carried more than just salt air in the late 16th century. They carried the promise of a new world, a vast, untamed continent brimming with opportunity, adventure, and unimaginable riches. For England, locked in a tense rivalry with Spain, securing a foothold across the Atlantic was not merely a dream, but a strategic imperative, a bold move on the global chessboard. At the heart of this audacious vision stood Sir Walter Raleigh, a man whose name was synonymous with ambition, intellect, and an almost reckless courage. Raleigh was no ordinary courtier. He was a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I, a man whose sharp wit and daring spirit had captured the attention of the monarch. He moved through the gilded halls of power with an air of sophisticated swagger. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay the heart of an explorer, a man captivated by the unknown and driven by a thirst for glory. He saw beyond the immediate concerns of the English court. He saw a future where England, not Spain, reigned supreme in the New World. His vision was grand, almost intoxicating, to establish a permanent English colony on the North American coast. A place that would serve as a base for trade, a haven for Protestantism, and perhaps a source of endless gold and silver. This wasn't Raleigh's first dance with the New World. Earlier attempts had been fraught with difficulty, yielding more tales of hardship than of triumph. A military expedition in 1585 had landed on Roanoke Island, a small sliver of land off the coast of what is now North Carolina. That venture, primarily a garrison of soldiers, struggled from the outset. Relations with the local Native American tribes, initially cautious, quickly deteriorated into mistrust and open conflict. The English, unfamiliar with the land, the climate, and the indigenous cultures, found themselves isolated and vulnerable. They relied heavily on supplies from home, which were often delayed or insufficient. The promise of quick riches proved elusive, and the harsh reality of survival in a wilderness far from the comforts of England began to bite. Eventually, after little more than a year of desperate struggle, the surviving members of that first attempt packed up and sailed home, disillusioned and defeated. But Raleigh was not a man to be deterred by failure. He learned from the mistakes of the past. The previous colony had been too focused on military might, too reliant on a transient population of soldiers. What was needed, he reasoned, was a true settlement, a city of Raleigh that would be self-sustaining, a home for English families who would put down roots, farm the land, and build a lasting presence. This shift in strategy was profound. It moved beyond mere exploitation to genuine colonization, a bold gamble on the resilience and determination of ordinary English people. The allure he presented was powerful. To a population facing economic hardship, social stagnation, and religious tensions, the New World offered an escape, a fresh start. Raleigh painted a picture of fertile lands waiting to be tilled, abundant resources for trade timber, furs, and perhaps even precious metals, and the freedom to build a society anew. Away from the rigid hierarchies of Old England. It was a message that resonated with those seeking a better life. A chance to carve out their own destiny in a land of limitless potential. The Queen, though cautious with her personal funds, granted Raleigh a royal patent, endorsing his ambitious project and giving it the stamp of official approval. Though much of the financial burden fell to him and his investors, the dream of a permanent English foothold in America, a shining beacon of English influence, began to take concrete shape under Raleigh's relentless drive. The stage was set, not just for a journey, but for an epic gamble against the vast, indifferent forces of nature and the unknown. With the vision firmly established, the next crucial step was finding the people willing to embark on such a perilous adventure. This was no mere military deployment. This was to be a true colony, a miniature England transplanted across the ocean. To lead this ambitious undertaking, Sir Walter Raleigh turned to a man he trusted. A man who had already seen the New World with his own eyes and possessed a unique skill set, John White. White was not a soldier or a seasoned politician, but an artist, a talented watercolorist who had meticulously documented the landscapes, flora, fauna, and, crucially, the indigenous peoples of the region during the earlier 1585 expedition. His maps and illustrations provided the most detailed glimpses England had yet seen of this mysterious continent. Raleigh believed White's previous experience, combined with his gentle demeanor and leadership qualities, made him the ideal governor for a colony intended to be peaceful and self-sufficient. So, in the spring of 1587, Governor John White gathered his colonists. This was a different kind of expedition from those that had come before. This was a family affair. 117 men, women, and children, drawn from various walks of English life, boarded 3 ships, the chief among them, a large merchant vessel. Among them were White's own daughter, Eleanor Dare, and her husband, Ananias Dare. This personal connection imbued the voyage with an even deeper emotional resonance for White. He was not just leading a group of settlers. He was carrying his own flesh and blood, his hopes for a new generation, to a foreign shore. This wasn't about military conquest. It was about laying down roots, cultivating the land, and building a community. The journey itself was a brutal test of endurance. Transatlantic voyages in the 16th century were not pleasure cruises. Cramped conditions below deck, the stench of unwashed bodies and stale food, the constant lurching of the ship in the face of colossal waves, and the ever-present threat of disease made every day a battle for survival. Weeks bled into months. The vast, unforgiving expanse of the Atlantic stretching endlessly before them. Fresh water was scarce, food monotonous and often spoiled, fears of storms, of sea monsters whispered about by superstitious sailors, and of the sheer unknown of their destination gnawed at the settlers. Yet, they pressed on, fueled by the hope of a promised land. A new life free from the constraints and hardships of England. For many, this was their last, best chance. Finally, after a grueling voyage, the ships reached the outer banks of North America in July 1587. The sight of land, even a desolate, sandy coastline, must have brought an immense wave of relief. Their destination was the site of the previous military colony on Roanoke Island. However, What they found was far from reassuring. The wooden fort from the 1585 expedition was in disrepair, overgrown and partially dismantled, a stark reminder of the previous failure. The few remaining structures were crumbling. There was no welcoming party, only the silent, brooding forest and the restless sea. It quickly became apparent that the small guard of 15 men left behind by the earlier expedition had either been killed or had simply vanished. This unsettling discovery immediately cast a shadow over their arrival, a chilling prelude to the greater mystery that lay ahead. Despite the ominous beginning, the colonists, under White's leadership, set about the monumental task of establishing their new home. They began to repair the old structures, clear land for planting, and try to make contact with the local Native American tribes. But the initial hopes for peaceful coexistence were quickly challenged. The previous English expedition had left a legacy of mistrust and violence, particularly with the Secotine tribe, though Governor White endeavored to mend these fractured relationships. The scars of past conflicts ran deep. The Native Americans, having learned a bitter lesson about English intentions, were wary and sometimes openly hostile. The promise of a new beginning, so vibrant just months before, was already starting to fray at the edges, replaced by the harsh realities of survival in an unfamiliar and potentially dangerous land. The birth of Virginia Dare, White's granddaughter and the first English child born in the New World, on August 18th, brought a brief flicker of joy and hope, a symbolic fresh start for the struggling community. But the challenges were mounting, and the supplies they had brought were dwindling fast. The harsh reality of life in the New World quickly descended upon the fledgling Roanoke colony. Despite their best efforts, the settlers found themselves in a precarious position. The harvest was poor, perhaps due to inexperience with the local climate and soil, or perhaps simply bad luck. Tools broke, and crucial building materials were scarce. Food, already limited from the arduous journey, was becoming a desperate concern as winter approached. The uneasy truce with some Native American tribes was fragile, and others remained openly hostile, making hunting and foraging outside the immediate settlement a dangerous undertaking. The dream of self-sufficiency, so central to Raleigh's vision, was proving far more challenging than anticipated. Recognizing the dire situation, Governor John White was faced with an agonizing decision. The colonists, desperate and vulnerable, implored him to return to England. Their very survival depended on a fresh shipment of supplies, food, tools, medicines, and reinforcements. It was a plea he could not ignore, despite the immense personal sacrifice it entailed. Leaving his daughter, Eleanor, his son-in-law, Ananias, and his infant granddaughter, Virginia, behind in a struggling, isolated settlement was a tormenting prospect for any father and grandfather. The thought of abandoning them, even temporarily, must have been unbearable. Yet, his duty as governor, his responsibility to the entire colony, weighed heavily upon him. He was the only one with the authority and the experience to secure the necessary aid. With a heavy heart, White made the fateful choice. He agreed to undertake the perilous journey back across the Atlantic, promising a swift return. The colonists, clinging to this fragile hope, watched him depart in late August 1587. The farewells must have been filled with a mixture of desperate hope and profound anxiety. Promises were exchanged. Assurances given that he would return as quickly as humanly possible. Ideally within a few months. They trusted him, believing he would not abandon them to their fate. For White, his final glance back at the small, struggling settlement, at the waving figures of his family and fellow colonists, must have been etched forever into his memory. He left them vulnerable, exposed to the unknown dangers of the wilderness, the unpredictable moods of the Native American tribes, and the slow, grinding threat of starvation, unbeknownst to White or the colonists he left behind. Their fates were already being sealed by events far beyond their control. The political winds in Europe were shifting dramatically. Spain, a formidable naval power and England's sworn enemy, was preparing its mighty armada for an invasion of England. This looming conflict would consume England's resources, tension, and, crucially, the ships. What was meant to be a swift turnaround for John White would become an agonizing, years-long ordeal. The colonists on Roanoke, isolated and dependent, would be left to face their uncertain future alone, unaware that the very nation that had sent them was about to become embroiled in a war that would effectively forget them. At least for a time. Their vulnerability, their absolute reliance on that promised return, became the chilling prelude to one of history's most enduring and unsettling mysteries. The waves, a relentless expanse of blue and gray, had carried Governor John White away from the fledgling settlement of Roanoke in 1587. A journey of necessity, not desire. He had left behind his daughter, Eleanor Dare, his son-in-law Ananias Dare, and his granddaughter Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. His heart heavy with the impending separation, White had promised the colonists a swift return, vowing to secure essential supplies and reinforcements from England to bolster their fragile foothold in this vast, untamed land. They needed tools, provisions, more people, and the vital support only the homeland could provide. That promise, whispered on the wind as his ship departed, would echo with an agonizing slowness through 3 years of geopolitical turmoil, personal anguish, and mounting dread, ultimately culminating in one of history's most chilling discoveries. The immediate return White envisioned was brutally thwarted by the harsh realities of the late 16th century. Transatlantic voyages were not merely long but fraught with peril, susceptible to violent storms, disease, and the ever-present threat of piracy. Yet, these physical dangers paled in comparison to the monumental obstacle that erupted across Europe, the Anglo-Spanish War. England, under Queen Elizabeth I, found itself locked in a desperate struggle for naval supremacy against the mighty Spanish Armada. Every available ship, every able-bodied sailor, every ounce of English resource was diverted to the war effort. The year 1588 saw the climactic showdown, a monumental naval battle that gripped the entire nation. In such a climate, the needs of a distant, nascent colony, though strategically important in the long run, were dwarfed by the immediate existential threat to England itself. John White, a man of determination and deep personal investment in Roanoke, found himself marooned by circumstance. His attempts to secure a relief fleet were met with polite refusals, then outright denials. He pleaded, he argued, he exhausted every avenue. But the answer remained steadfast. England's survival came first. Imagine his torment. Thousands of miles separated him from his family and the community he was sworn to protect. Knowing they were ill-equipped and vulnerable, each passing day, each week, each month that stretched into a year, then 2, then 3, would have gnawed at his soul. The promise of a swift return became a distant, mocking echo. He was a father, a grandfather, and a governor, trapped by forces far beyond his control. The vivid image of his loved ones fading slightly with each dawn, replaced by anxious imaginings of their fate. The wait was a living death, a slow torture of uncertainty. He was finally able to secure passage back in 1590, albeit on a privateering expedition that had other objectives before heading to Roanoke, further extending his agonizing delay. This delay, born of war and the unforgiving nature of 16th-century travel, inadvertently sealed the colony's fate, condemning it to an oblivion that would forever haunt American history. As the year 1590 dawned, White finally managed to secure passage back to the New World. It was not on a dedicated relief mission but as part of a privateering venture. 2 ships, the Hopewell and the Moonlight, which would first seek out Spanish prizes before delivering White to Roanoke. The voyage itself was arduous, filled with its own dangers and distractions as the privateers pursued their lucrative goals. For John White, every tack, every sighting of a potential enemy ship, every delay for plunder, must have been an unbearable strain. His mind, undoubtedly, was not on the spoils of war but fixated solely on the small patch of land across the vast ocean where his family and community waited. Or so he desperately hoped. The journey, a testament to the sheer will of one man against overwhelming odds, eventually brought him back to the familiar, yet now dreadfully unfamiliar, shores of North America in August 1590. The approach to Roanoke Island itself was shrouded in an eerie quiet, a palpable absence that immediately set the nerves of White and his accompanying crew on edge. There was no smoke rising from hearths, no sight of a lookout, no joyful shouts of recognition, no flags flapping in the wind. The usual indicators of a thriving settlement were conspicuously, disturbingly absent. As their small boats made landfall and they stepped onto the sandy beach, an unsettling silence descended upon them, broken only by the lapping of waves and the cries of seabirds. This was not the vibrant, bustling colony White had left behind. It was a landscape seemingly reclaimed by nature, shrouded in an unnatural stillness that bespoke abandonment. Not life. The very air felt heavy with unspoken questions. Their first discovery was a small boat, partially submerged and heavily damaged, indicating either neglect or a struggle. It was a grim prelude, pushing inland, through overgrown paths that had once been clearings. They pressed towards the site where the fort and houses had stood. White's heart must have pounded with a mixture of desperate hope and profound fear. With every step through the encroaching wilderness, the dread intensified. The natural world had begun its slow, relentless reclamation. Weeds choked the ground. Vines climbed over what remained, and the dense foliage seemed to whisper secrets of an untold past. The once familiar landscape was alien, transformed by 3 years of human absence. Then, the full horror of their discovery unfurled. The fort, which had been a symbol of their presence and protection, was entirely dismantled, not merely dilapidated, but systematically taken apart. The houses, carefully constructed by the colonists, were gone. There were no charred remains, no signs of a sudden, violent conflagration. Instead, there was an organized, almost deliberate absence. It was as if the settlement had been carefully deconstructed, its materials repurposed or removed. The scene was one of utter desolation, a stark tableau of what was once a community, now reduced to an empty, haunting space. The vibrant settlement White remembered, filled with the laughter of children and the industry of pioneers, had vanished, leaving behind only the ghosts of its former self. The silence was not just a lack of sound. It was an oppressive presence, a heavy shroud draped over the empty land, speaking volumes of an untold, terrifying story. Amidst this profound silence and desolation, one singular, cryptic clue emerged from the overgrown landscape, offering a tantalizing whisper of explanation, yet deepening the mystery exponentially. As White and his men meticulously scoured the deserted site, their desperate search for any sign of life, any clue, led them to a palisade post of sturdy timber that would have once formed part of the protective fence around the settlement. Carved deeply into its weathered surface, clear and unambiguous, was a single word, Croton. Nearby, carved into a tree at the former entrance to the fort, they found the partial inscription, Sorrow. White instantly recognized the word. Croton was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, situated to the south of Roanoke. It was also the name of the friendly Native American tribe who inhabited that island, a tribe with whom the English colonists had established amicable relations. The significance of this word resonated immediately with White, recalling a prior agreement made with the colonists before his departure. They had agreed that if they were forced to leave the settlement, they would carve a specific message indicating their destination. Crucially, if they were in distress, they were to carve a cross above the message. White's desperate eyes scanned the palisade post, then the tree, searching for that critical symbol of distress. There was no cross. Its absence was as significant as the presence of the word itself. For John White, this discovery brought a flicker of hope. However faint, the lack of a cross suggested that the colonists had not been in immediate danger or under duress when they left. It implied a planned, albeit unscheduled, relocation to Croton Island, perhaps seeking refuge or integration with the friendly tribe there. This interpretation, while offering a semblance of explanation, simultaneously opened a Pandora's box of new questions. Why had they moved? Why had they left no more detailed message? Why had they abandoned the prepared settlement? And why, after 3 years of waiting, were they not there to greet him? The Croton carving, intended as a beacon of information, became instead the core enigma of the lost colony. The immediate implications of this discovery were profound and devastating. The hope of finding a thriving community, or even the remnants of a struggle, was replaced by the unsettling reality of a complete, enigmatic disappearance. White and his men attempted to sail to Croton Island to follow up on the clue, but treacherous weather, including a severe storm, thwarted their efforts. The weather was so violent that anchors were lost, and the ships were severely damaged, making further exploration impossible for the time being. With dwindling supplies and damaged ships, the expedition was forced to abandon its immediate search and return to England, leaving the fate of the lost colonists unresolved. The single word, Croton, became the most famous and enduring symbol of America's oldest unsolved mystery. It suggested a path, a destination, but offered no true closure. It transformed the Roanoke expedition from a tale of colonial ambition into a haunting legend. Was it a message of peaceful assimilation? A desperate cry for help disguised by the absence of a cross? A subtle misdirection? The silence of the abandoned settlement, punctuated only by that carved word, became a powerful testament to the vulnerability of early European ventures in the New World and the enduring, impenetrable secrets that the wilderness can hold. The deserted village, the dismantled fort, and the chilling silence, all pointed to a story untold, a fate unknown, leaving generations to ponder the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke and the single, cryptic word that remained its only epitaph. The desolate island held its secrets close, its sandy shores and whispering pines offering no clear answers to the fate of the 115 English men, women, and children who vanished from Roanoke between 1587 and 1590. Governor John White's return to an empty settlement, marked only by the cryptic carving Croton, opened a wound in history that has never truly healed. For centuries, historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts have grappled with the question of what became of the lost colony, formulating various earthly explanations that seek to ground the mystery in the harsh realities of colonial life, geopolitical tensions, and the unforgiving American wilderness. These theories, meticulously pieced together from scant clues and historical context, offer plausible, if not definitive, answers, each painting a different picture of the colonists' final days. One of the most enduring and widely discussed theories posits that the Roanoke colonists did not perish but rather integrated with local Native American tribes. This assimilation theory gains significant traction from the very clue White discovered, the word Croton carved into a palisade post, and CRO into a nearby tree, notably without the cross that would have signaled distress. Croton was the name of a friendly tribe residing on what is now Hatteras Island, an area known to the English colonists. Before his departure, White had indeed instructed the colonists that if they moved, they should carve their destination, and if they were in danger, they should add a cross. The absence of the cross has been interpreted by many as a clear indication that the move was planned and, crucially, not made under duress, suggesting a voluntary or mutually beneficial relocation. The relationship between early English settlers and Native American tribes was complex, often oscillating between cooperation and conflict. However, historical accounts suggest that the Croton people, under their chief Manteo, who had even traveled to England, maintained relatively amicable relations with the English colonists. For the struggling Roanoke settlers, facing dwindling supplies and the harsh realities of survival in a new land, seeking assistance or outright integration with a well-established and knowledgeable indigenous population would have been a logical and potentially life-saving decision. Native American tribes, in many documented instances throughout history, practiced adoption, taking in individuals or even groups from other communities, sometimes for cultural reasons, sometimes to replenish their own numbers lost to disease or warfare. This practice could have provided a pathway for the English colonists to be absorbed into a Native American way of life, learning essential survival skills such as hunting, fishing, and agriculture adapted to the local environment, skills which the English notoriously struggled with in their early colonial attempts. Further lending credence to the assimilation theory are intriguing historical anecdotes and archaeological findings from later periods. In 1709, British explorer John Lawson, in his A New Voyage to Carolina, described encountering Native Americans in the region who claimed to be descendants of the English settlers. These individuals, according to Lawson, had gray eyes and spoke good English, and stated that several of their ancestors were white people and could talk in a book. While Lawson's account is more than a century after the disappearance, it provides a fascinating echo of the assimilation theory. More recently, archaeological excavations at sites on Hatteras Island and in other inland locations, sometimes referred to as Site X, have uncovered artifacts that could support the idea of European presence among Native American communities. These include fragments of English pottery, metal tools, and other items of European manufacture found in contexts alongside Native American artifacts, suggesting interactions or prolonged cohabitation. While no definitive smoking gun has been found, these tantalizing clues keep the assimilation theory firmly in the forefront of discussions. The idea that the lost colonists simply adapted to a new life, blending into the tapestry of Native American culture, is perhaps the most hopeful, if still unproven, explanation for their vanishing. In stark contrast to the assimilation theory, the massacre theory offers a far more grim and violent end to the Roanoke colony. This theory posits that the entire settlement was attacked and wiped out by hostile Native American tribes, or, less commonly suggested but still considered, by rival European powers, specifically the Spanish. The history of early European colonization in the Americas is rife with instances of bloody conflict between settlers and indigenous peoples, fueled by misunderstandings, resource competition, land disputes, and acts of aggression from both sides. While the Croton tribe was generally friendly, other regional tribes, such as those that would later form the powerful Powhatan Confederacy to the north, held varying degrees of hostility towards the English invaders. Prior to John White's 1587 voyage, earlier English expeditions to Roanoke had not always been peaceful. Sir Richard Grenville's actions during the 1585 expedition, including the burning of a Native American village over a stolen silver cup, created animosity that could have festered and led to retaliation. A sudden, coordinated attack by a hostile tribe, perhaps viewing the English as an encroaching threat to their lands and way of life, could have overwhelmed the vulnerable colonists. The lack of a distress cross, often cited as evidence against a massacre, could be explained by the swiftness and brutality of such an assault, leaving no time for a warning to be carved. The dismantled fort and missing houses, rather than suggesting an orderly departure, could be the result of a victorious tribe dismantling the enemy's stronghold for resources or as an act of destruction and psychological dominance. Alternatively, a few survivors might have disassembled parts of the fort to build smaller, more inconspicuous shelters or boats to escape, only to vanish into the wilderness or perish at sea. Spanish involvement, though less frequently emphasized than Native American attacks, also presents a plausible, albeit unsubstantiated, massacre scenario. Spain, at the height of its imperial power in the late 16th century, considered much of the Americas its exclusive domain. English attempts to establish colonies, particularly along the eastern seaboard, were viewed as direct infringements on Spanish territory and a strategic threat. The Spanish had a history of actively seeking out and destroying rival European settlements, as evidenced by their brutal massacre of the French Huguenot colony of Fort Caroline in Florida in 1565. Given the ongoing Anglo-Spanish War, a clandestine Spanish expedition to eliminate the English presence at Roanoke would have been a perfectly logical, if ruthless, military objective. However, extensive searches of Spanish archival records have yielded no direct evidence of such an attack on Roanoke. While the absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence, particularly given the potential for lost or unrecorded actions, it makes the Spanish massacre theory more speculative than others. One significant challenge to the massacre theory, whether by Native Americans or Spanish, is the complete absence of human remains. No mass graves, no scattered bones, no signs of a large-scale battle have ever been definitively found at the Roanoke settlement site. While some suggest bodies could have been removed or lost to the elements over centuries, the utter lack of any forensic evidence of violence remains a major hurdle for this theory. Furthermore, the rumors heard by Jamestown settlers years later, suggesting that the Powhatan Confederacy had massacred the Roanoke colonists at the behest of their chief Wahunsenkaw, are highly contested. These rumors often served political purposes, potentially aimed at intimidating the new English settlers, or were misinterpretations of complex tribal histories, without direct archaeological or corroborating historical evidence. The massacre theory, though emotionally compelling, remains largely unproven, leaving the fate of the colonists shrouded in violent speculation. Finally, the environmental theory offers a less dramatic but equally devastating explanation for the colony's disappearance: that the colonists succumbed to natural forces such as disease, famine, or extreme weather, forcing them to disperse or perish. Early colonial ventures were notoriously fragile, with settlers often ill-prepared for the harsh realities of the New World. Disease, in particular, was a rampant killer in early settlements like Jamestown, where unfamiliar pathogens, poor sanitation, and weakened immune systems due to malnutrition routinely decimated populations. A virulent outbreak of disease, perhaps an illness for which they had no natural immunity or effective treatments, could have swept through the small colony, rapidly reducing its numbers and leaving the survivors too weak to maintain the settlement or even bury their dead properly. The absence of mass graves could, in this context, be attributed to disease wiping out the remaining population, leaving no one to perform such tasks, or perhaps a small number of survivors attempting to bury their dead as best they could before abandoning the site. Famine was another constant threat. The English colonists often struggled with agricultural practices in the New World, failing to adapt quickly enough to local crops and growing seasons, and often relying heavily on supplies from England or trade with Native Americans. If these supplies dwindled or trade relations soured, starvation would become an imminent danger. Scientific evidence provides compelling support for a severe environmental stressor during the period of Roanoke's disappearance. Triering data, carefully analyzed by climate scientists, indicates that the area around Roanoke experienced an exceptionally severe drought between 1587 and 1589, arguably the worst in 800 years. Such a prolonged drought would have devastated their crops, withered wild edible plants, driven away game animals, and severely limited access to fresh drinking water. Under such conditions, maintaining a static settlement would have been impossible. The colonists would have been forced to leave their homes in a desperate search for water and food, scattering in small groups, some potentially heading to Croton Island as hinted by the carving, others possibly venturing inland. This exodus, driven by sheer survival instinct, could easily have led to their piecemeal demise in the vast and unforgiving wilderness. Extreme weather events also played a role in the perilous lives of early colonists. While specific records of a devastating hurricane or a particularly harsh winter during the 1587 to 1590 period are not as definitively linked to Roanoke as the drought, such events were common. A severe storm could have destroyed their crops, damaged their homes, scattered their meager belongings, or even wrecked any boats they possessed, severing their last link to potential escape or resupply. The dismantling of the fort, often cited in other theories, could also fit within an environmental context. If starvation or disease made their position untenable, they might have meticulously taken apart their structures to salvage useful materials, timber for smaller boats, or perhaps to build more temporary, mobile shelters as they embarked on a desperate search for sustenance elsewhere. Their departure, in this scenario, would not be a sign of peaceful integration or violent destruction, but rather a last-ditch effort at survival. A forced migration driven by the existential threat of nature itself. The environmental theory, particularly with the strong scientific backing of the drought evidence, offers a powerful motive for the colonists to abandon their established settlement. It explains why they would leave, providing a foundational impetus that could then lead to either assimilation, seeking aid from friendly tribes during a crisis, or dispersal and eventual death from exposure and starvation. It reconciles the lack of bodies with the desperate circumstances of survival, where fallen individuals might have been left unburied by a dwindling, struggling population constantly on the move. While it doesn't definitively tell us what happened to every individual, it provides a compelling framework for understanding the catalyst behind their disappearance, making it an indispensable part of any comprehensive attempt to unravel the enigma of the lost colony of Roanoke. Each of these earthly explanations, while incomplete on its own, adds a crucial layer to the enduring mystery, reminding us that the answers to history's most haunting questions often lie buried beneath the sands of time, waiting to be unearthed by diligent research and persistent curiosity. The desolate island of Roanoke, having silently guarded its chilling secret for centuries, presents a void in human understanding that even the most meticulous historical inquiry struggles to fill. While scholarly pursuits offer plausible earthly explanations rooted in the harsh realities of colonial life, assimilation, massacre, or environmental collapse, they often fall short of fully satisfying the profound sense of unease that permeates the legend. For many, the utter lack of definitive evidence, the complete erasure of an entire community without a trace, points beyond the logical and the conventional. It suggests a deeper, more unsettling truth, a whisper from the unknown that has echoed through the generations, hinting at powers beyond human comprehension, ancient curses, and an unseen, primal force that perhaps consumed the colonists, leaving only an unsettling silence in their wake. The land itself, long before the arrival of the English, was steeped in the spiritual traditions and complex mythologies of its indigenous inhabitants. For the various Algonquian tribes who called this coastal region home, the natural world was not merely a collection of resources but a living, breathing entity, teeming with spirits both benevolent and malevolent. Ancestral spirits watched over sacred sites. Animal spirits imbued the forests and waters with their essence. and powerful elemental forces dictated the rhythms of life and death. When the English, with their radically different worldview, arrived and began to impose their will upon this ancient landscape, they may have, unknowingly or through their actions, disturbed forces far older and more potent than their muskets and nascent scientific understanding could fathom. Imagine the sacred grounds, perhaps burial sites or places of spiritual significance to the local tribes, being disturbed by the colonists' axes and plows as they cleared land for their settlement. The very act of staking a claim, building structures, and attempting to dominate a wilderness that had long been respected and communed with by its original inhabitants, could have been perceived by the land's guardians both seen and unseen as an act of profound disrespect, an unforgivable sacrilege. Tales abound in Native American folklore of places imbued with powerful spiritual energy, some benevolent, offering solace and abundance, others dangerous, demanding respect and caution from those who dared to tread upon them. Could Roanoke have been one such place? A cursed ground whose malevolent spirits lay dormant until disturbed by the foreign intrusion. Perhaps the land itself, personified as a powerful and vengeful entity, chose to reject this alien presence, slowly but inexorably reabsorbing its interlopers into its ancient fabric, leaving no trace behind. The severe drought, a scientifically documented environmental factor, could also be reinterpreted through this spiritual lens. Instead of a mere meteorological phenomenon, could be seen as a manifestation of the land's displeasure, a curse invoked by angered spirits or a deliberate act of the natural world pushing back against those who sought to exploit it. The drying wells, the withered crops, the scarcity of game, these would not be random misfortunes but precise, deliberate acts of spiritual retribution, designed to starve out and drive away the unwanted settlers. Furthermore, Native American legends often feature trickster spirits, shapeshifters, or unseen entities that lure people away, cause disorientation, or make them vanish. While the specifics of a Wendigo-like spirit, more common further north, might not apply directly, the concept of a primal, non-human intelligence that can erase existence, rather than merely end life, resonates deeply with the Roanoke mystery. A force that doesn't simply kill, but makes one unbe, dissolving their presence from history, fits the complete disappearance of the colony far more chillingly than a simple massacre. The English, with their firm belief in a single God and a hierarchical universe, might have dismissed these indigenous warnings as superstition or savagery, unaware that they were treading on spiritual quicksand, their dismissal perhaps sealing their doom against a power they couldn't even perceive. This clash of worldviews, where one side fails to acknowledge the spiritual potency of the other's domain, adds a layer of tragic irony to the unfolding mystery. Beyond the ancient echoes of the land, the enduring mystery of Roanoke has been further fueled by reports from later settlers and explorers who ventured into the vicinity of the vanished colony. These accounts, often anecdotal, passed down through oral traditions, or recorded in fragmentary and often sensationalized narratives, describe strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena that contribute to Roanoke's reputation as a place touched by the uncanny. While skepticism is warranted for such tales, their sheer persistence and the commonality of certain themes speak to a pervasive sense of unease that lingered long after the colonists themselves were gone. One of the most common themes in these reports revolves around ghostly apparitions and disembodied sounds. Later explorers and hunters traversing the dense forests and desolate shores of Roanoke and Hatteras Islands sometimes spoke of fleeting glimpses of figures clad in antiquated European garb, shimmering at the edge of vision only to vanish when approached. Others claimed to hear faint, distant cries, the sound of children's laughter carried on the wind, the clang of tools, or the faint, melancholic strains of English songs echoing from the overgrown depths of the woods. Sounds that abruptly ceased as one drew near. These could be interpreted as the restless spirits of the colonists themselves, trapped between worlds, forever replaying the moments of their last existence, or perhaps desperately attempting to communicate their fate from beyond the veil. The sheer longing for answers, often projected onto these desolate landscapes, could easily conjure such auditory and visual hallucinations in the minds of those searching for meaning. Beyond direct apparitions, reports often touched upon more subtle, yet equally unsettling, phenomena. Unexplained lights, described as eerie glows or moving orbs, were said to drift through the swamps at night, sometimes appearing to mimic lanterns carried by unseen hands. Sudden, localized fogs would descend without warning, disorienting travelers and making familiar paths disappear, only to lift as mysteriously as they arrived. Unusual weather patterns, confined to the immediate vicinity of the old settlement, were sometimes reported pockets of oppressive stillness, sudden gusts of wind from nowhere, or inexplicable cold spots even on warm days. These could be seen as manifestations of the supernatural energy at play, the land itself reacting to its haunted past, or perhaps residual energy imprints left by the dramatic events that transpired. Furthermore, some accounts spoke of a pervasive sense of disorientation and psychological impact on those who spent too long in the Roanoke area. Tales circulated of people feeling constantly watched, an inexplicable dread creeping into their hearts, or even experiencing temporary bouts of madness or profound melancholy when venturing too deep into the old colony grounds. The woods were said to swallow people, making them lose their way even on well-worn trails, leading to a feeling that the land itself was actively resisting intrusion, attempting to keep its secrets by confusing and deterring those who sought answers. While some of these can be attributed to the natural perils of dense wilderness, the consistent narrative of an intentional disorienting force points to something more than mere navigational error. The Jamestown settlers, arriving 2 decades after Roanoke's disappearance, also contributed to this tapestry of whispers, though their reports often contained factual inaccuracies and served their own political agendas. The rumors they heard and propagated about Roanoke fed into the supernatural narrative. Tales of massacres, some suggesting that the Powhatan Confederacy, under Chief Wahunsenkaw, had been responsible, were often embellished with dark details that emphasized the savagery of the wilderness and the mysterious ways of its inhabitants. While the details of these accounts may be historically dubious, their very existence demonstrates how the Roanoke mystery became a cautionary tale, breeding fear and superstition among subsequent European arrivals, and creating an atmosphere where the unexplained was readily attributed to malevolent forces, whether human or spiritual. The inability to find a rational explanation fostered an environment ripe for the propagation of terrifying myths, elevating Roanoke from a mere historical failure to a place cursed by an unseen hand. Ultimately, the most profound and enduring aspect of the Roanoke mystery, transcending all specific theories and anecdotal reports, is the deeply unsettling feeling that something unseen, something primal, consumed the colonists, erasing their very presence from history. It is this psychological and existential impact that truly defines the legend, distinguishing it from other historical tragedies. The absence of bodies, the lack of a struggle, the systematic dismantling of the fort without a clear reason. These are not just missing pieces of a puzzle. They represent a fundamental void in human understanding, a gaping hole where 115 lives once stood. This feeling of erasure is perhaps the most chilling aspect. It is not merely that the colonists died, for death is a universal certainty, but that they ceased to exist in a tangible, verifiable way. Their very presence was nullified, their existence wiped clean from the historical record with an unnerving efficiency. This kind of vanishing taps into one of humanity's deepest, most primal fears, the fear of being utterly forgotten, of disappearing without a trace, leaving no legacy, no marker, no evidence of having ever been. It suggests a loss of control so absolute that it defies rationalization, reminding us of humanity's profound fragility against overwhelming, perhaps supernatural, forces. The metaphorical idea of the land swallowing them takes on a darker, more active intent than mere natural reclamation. It implies a conscious, almost predatory act by the wilderness itself, or by the spirits that embody it. The ancient forests, the vast swamps, the unforgiving sea. These are not just obstacles but potentially sentient entities, choosing to absorb the foreign element, dissolving them into the very earth and water from which they sought to build a new life. It's as if the New World, in its primal wisdom, rejected this early intrusion, and Roanoke stood as its first, stark warning. Its inhabitants sacrificed to maintain the untouched sanctity of the land. This leads to the notion of a curse, not just a localized misfortune, but a curse on the very idea of the colony, a spiritual barrier against European encroachment. Perhaps Roanoke was always meant to fail, not through human error or tribal conflict, but by a preordained fate, a supernatural decree. The colonists didn't just meet an unfortunate end. They were systematically unmade by an otherworldly influence. The otherworld aspect, the possibility that they didn't merely die but transitioned to another dimension, another plane of existence, or were taken by non-human entities, further fuels this profound unease. It pushes the boundaries of conventional thought, forcing us to confront possibilities that lie outside the realm of documented history and scientific explanation. The enduring mystery itself becomes a living entity, a pervasive force that continues to exert its influence. It draws in curious minds, yet perpetually withholds its secrets, creating an almost uncanny valley effect. Something almost makes sense, but the pieces never quite fit, leaving a profound and nagging sense of discomfort. This uncanny nature, the simultaneous familiarity and profound alienness of the situation, is what cements Roanoke's place in popular culture. It transcends a mere historical footnote to become a mythic archetype of vanishing, a chilling reminder of the unknown powers that may lurk just beyond the periphery of our perception. While earthly explanations provide logical frameworks and commendable attempts to unravel the enigma, they often fail to capture the profound unease and the persistent sense of something more that permeates the Roanoke legend. It is this whisper from the unknown, the suggestion that forces far beyond human understanding were at play, that truly gives the mystery its enduring, haunting power. keeps Roanoke alive in our collective consciousness. Constant, unsettling reminder that sometimes the answers we seek are not to be found in history books or archaeological digs, but in the chilling silence of a desolate island, where ancient secrets sleep, undisturbed, and perhaps eternally unknowable. The desolate island holds its secrets close. The fate of Roanoke's lost colonists remains an open wound in history, a chilling reminder of what can vanish without a trace, leaving only an unsettling silence. Thank you for daring to delve into the unknown with Grave Vale Echoes. If these whispers from the past captivated you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Until next time, keep exploring the shadows.